welcome back to another video. In this video today, I'm going to answer a question that is asked over and over and over again, and that is how to lay down your colored pencils on your coloring page, whether it's best to go lightest to darkest or darkest to lightest. Now, I know I have tons of tutorials on my channel showing exactly how I do it, but I really feel like a lot of this is preference, and some of us like to do it one way as opposed to the other. So I have Johanna Basford's World of Flowers, and then my other favorite, Romantic Country, and I'm going to use these two coloring books, and I'm going to show you instances where I have gone lightest to darkest, and then instances where I've gone darkest to lightest, and I'm going to explain to you exactly why I would do it one way as opposed to the other. And then towards the end of the video, I'm going to try to color two different objects, and I'm going to do it lightest to darkest and then do the other one darkest to lightest. And we're going to see if there is even a difference in how the colors lay down or how it looks on the object on the coloring page. If you check the description box down below, I will have everything down there that you see in this video, as well as links to my Etsy shop, my Facebook group, and my Patreon if you would like to support me there. I now also have channel membership. If you would like more information out about that, you can click the join button down below. So in this video, I'm specifically going to focus on Prismacolors and Polychromos, since I feel like those are a couple of the two most popular colored pencils that do get used by a lot of colorists. And a lot of the things that I've colored in this book, and even a lot of my tutorials, I've done with Prismacolors. So a couple of these things that I'm showing you, you will probably recognize them from a previous video, but I just want to go over a couple of these things that I've colored and show you exactly why I do it one way as opposed to the other. Now with Prismacolors, I generally go lightest to darkest because for me, I feel like it's best to preserve that highlighted area. If you've watched my tutorials before, you've probably seen this one for these leaves. I don't remember if there was a tutorial on this one. I think there was, but on all of these leaves in those tutorials, I do always mention that I'm laying my lightest color down first. And the reason being is because I want to be able to create that pop of color. And in doing so, I want to be able to preserve that highlighted area. So especially when I'm coloring leaves, I like to go lightest to darkest. And the reason behind that is because I want to be able to set aside the area that is going to be the highlighted area and then be able to come back with my midtone and my shading colors. And that is how I do leaves most of the time. I'm pretty sure that's how I've done it with all of these. But the main reason is because if you look at these leaves, you could see that you've got lots of little small tiny areas. And I find that a lot of beginners that are just coming into this hobby, especially in my private coloring classes that I'm teaching, I've been able to watch a lot of you color. And so what I have noticed is a lot of you get very frustrated because you're laying down your colors and then all of the colors are just sort of blending all into one another. And so that is why I like to go lightest to darkest, especially on tiny small spaces on anything that I'm coloring. It helps me to preserve that area so that I don't come back with my midtone and my darkest color and go into that area. And a lot of times it's still very easy to accidentally go into that area. But if that does happen, you can always come back with a Posca pen. You can use an eraser and pull some of that color up. And it's always very easily remedied. Now on these leaves here, I did do the same thing, but I always like to go lightest to darkest just for that very reason, just to be able to preserve that area. And a lot of times you'll see me come back. And I think that's what I did on this one. I came back and I laid that bright yellow color or orangish yellow. I think that's like yellow to orange or something. But I came back and I laid that color right over the top of the blue, even afterwards. But I still had most of the other colors laid down on this particular leaf. And if you've not seen that video, you can go back and watch that. I'll link it in the upper right hand corner, but there's a tutorial for these and there is a tutorial for all of these leaves as well. So I also did this leaf, and this one was done the exact same way. If you want to see that tutorial, I will link that one in the upper right hand corner too. But you could see that I've got lots of bright highlights all in the areas where I wanted to give them that extra bit of pop. And it was really important for me to do that here because I'm using so many different colors in this leaf. And I'm blending in greens with pinks, and I believe there's even some teal in here. I think this is the sap green light, if I'm not mistaken. I would have to go back and watch the video to see, but I love how this one came together. And I did lay out my colors from lightest to darkest, even when I went to the pinks and the other colors that are a little bit different, and I laid them all out in that order. But this is one of my absolute favorite leaves. So now we have this page here, and this was a color along that I did on my channel when I first started my YouTube channel. And on this page, I also went lightest to darkest. Now, a lot of times I like to use my lightest color as a first layer so that I could blend the other colors into those colors and create a blend of two colors. Now, I'm going to try to find this video. You can watch me color, and I think I do list all of the colors that I used, but you can see that we have a much bigger area back here where I colored this house, and you've got a whole lot of things laying over the top of this much larger area. I just find that it is easiest for me coloring a very large area like this if I lay down my lightest color as a full layer sometimes, and then come back and lay my midtone and then my darker colors right over the top of that, creating a blend of those colors, but still keeping a lot of these highlighted areas open. If I'm coloring a much larger area, I tend to go a little bit slower, and it just really helps me to have that base layer there. But this one was a full color along. It's on my channel if you want to follow along. I did color the house. You could see exactly how I color it. I'll try to link that video in the upper right hand corner. For me, it really all depends whether or not I'm coloring a much larger area and the way that I go about doing it, or if I'm coloring a very small area. This is the Romantic Country book, and this is a page that I was just coloring recently. And this is why it's so important sometimes to lay your lightest color and then come back with your darkest color, especially when you're using Prismacolors. I just find that the Prismacolors work better that way, at least for me they do. Of course, again, it's all preference. But on this pine cone, I was actually on this page using some of my color combinations that I shared in a previous video. But on every one of these, you can see I've got really tiny spaces. These sunflowers right here, had I not laid down the lightest color first and then came back with my darkest colors, I probably would have used up all of the space in these little teeny tiny petals and gone into it with my midtone and my darkest color. I really had to be careful with these, and on the leaves, since the leaves are so small, I had to make sure I really took out that highlighted area first. And then especially on this pine cone, you could see each one of these spaces are teeny tiny, and a lot of times in those cases it is very easy to cover up your highlighted area, and sometimes you may want to come back with a Posca and really give those just a little bit of an extra pop. And the same thing for the mushrooms. I did those exactly the same. I preserved my highlighted area first, and then I came back with my midtone and then my darkest in that exact order. Okay, so this was another video, and I did these with Polychromos. And when I'm using Polychromos, I tend to use them a little bit differently than I do with my Prismacolors, even if the area is smaller, because I find that the Polychromos work better if I lay the darkest color down first, because I feel like the Polychromos perform a lot better when I go from the darkest color to the lightest color. If you've not seen this tutorial, I will make sure that this is linked in the upper right hand corner as well. And if you look really closely at this, or have even watched the tutorial, this was a tutorial on how to use oil-based pencils. But if you look really closely, you will notice that I did come back with Posca and add quite a bit of that. And that was because I went darkest to lighters, because I feel like the pencils perform the best in that way. But I did have to come back with the Posca. I can't remember if it was a Posca or a gel pen, but it was one of the two. And I came back and I added in some more highlights because I probably felt like I covered up too much of it. If you ever feel like you go into an area where you don't want to because you didn't preserve enough of that highlighted area and you still want to get that pop of color, you can always come back with a Posca or a gel pen and you can add it right back in. It's a really simple fix. I even did it here on the little milk jug and at the top of the little milk jug as well. So I have two leaves here laying right next to one another. So I'm going to color in these two leaves, and I'm going to do lightest to darkest on one and darkest to lightest on the other. And we're going to see if they look any different. Now, y'all, this is going to be a challenge for me because I'm so used to going lightest to darkest. So having to go darkest to lightest is going to be quite a bit different. So I do have three colors here. I've got Kelly green, spring green, and pale sage. So I went and grabbed my marine green in case I need one extra color here. And so I'm going to start with this one here. And this is going to be a little bit of a challenge for me because in the first leaf, I'm going to go darkest to lightest. And then in this one, I'm going to go lightest to darkest. Now, y'all have watched my tutorials before, so you know what it looks like when I go lightest to darkest and my whole reasoning behind doing that. So we're going to see if we can create the same look here and get them to both look exactly the same and still be able to focus on keeping that highlighted area there so that I don't accidentally go into it with my darker colors. So I'm just going to start here at the top and lay my darkest color. And I'm going to come back down here at the bottom and do the same. Now I'm going to go to my next color, which is Kelly green, and I want to blend a little bit of this in here. And then here on the outside, let me just put a pop of the spring green in there as well. Now I'm going to come towards the center and start pulling some of these colors down. Let me go ahead and use my Kelly green, and I'm going to use this color to add some of it. And see, I noticed I'm already going into those areas where I would normally keep a highlight. I'm telling y'all, this is difficult. When you're used to doing it one way and then you try to do it another way, it makes it much harder. So let me just go over the areas I would normally make darker and see if I could make this work and stay out of my highlighted areas, or what I want to be my highlighted areas. Let me go ahead and add a little bit of the spring green. And again, I'm trying really hard to stay out of those areas where I want to put the pale sage. This first initial layer is going to be the most difficult for me for sure, because I could tell I'm already going into some of those areas where I'd like to keep a highlight. And it's just because those spaces are so small, especially on little leaves like this, and some leaves are even smaller than this one. So now I'm able to come back and use my pale sage, and so I'm going to mark out these areas where I want just my highlight color. And oh my goodness, that just made coloring for me so much more difficult. Because again, I'm not used to doing it that way. So now I'm going to come back in the same exact order, and I'm going to start adding my second layer. Of course, I'm going darkest to lightest, so I'm going to grab my darkest color first, and I'm going to start laying this color in the places where I want to emphasize a little bit more shadows. So I think that first initial layer is probably going to be the most difficult for me. And now, since the colors are all laid down, it may be a little bit easier. Oh, I can't wait to come back and do the other one and see what a difference it makes. Honestly, y'all, it just made coloring for me just a little bit stressful. I don't know. And coloring's not supposed to be stressful. It's supposed to be relaxing. So that just goes to show that it's really all preference and how you want to do things. It's really important to find your own coloring style, and I think whether or not you go lightest to darkest or darkest to lightest sort of follows along with your coloring style too, and just what you are more comfortable with. So now I have the Kelly green, and I'm going to add this color in. And again, this is my second mid-tone, I guess, since I am using 4 colors. I'm going to try to start blending some of these colors out and pulling them together just a little bit. And again, I'm trying to stay out of that highlighted area. See, it's a little bit easier now that I was able to lay down that highlight color. It was really the first layer that was the most difficult for me. Honestly, it's just because I am most familiar with doing it that way first, and that's just what works for me. You'll have to let me know what works for you down in the comments below, because I would love to hear if you go lightest to darkest or darkest to lightest on your coloring pages. Now we need a little bit of a pop here, so I'm going to add some of this spring green, and I'm going to pull it into where I have that pale sage, but not a whole lot, because I still want to preserve that highlight area. But this color is so bright and pretty that it just gives it that little bit of extra pop. And now I can finally come back with my lightest color, my pale sage, and fill those areas in again and blend all these colors together. And now I'm gonna see if I can get a little bit more of my darkest color down here, just to add a little bit more depth and dimension. I don't know, y'all, I really don't like doing it that way for leaves. It just really honestly made it so much more difficult for me. So let me come back with my Kelly green and let's blend some of those colors out. And then the spring green. And then lastly, my highlight, my pale sage. Okay, so that's our darkest to lightest. And y'all have seen me do lightest to darkest, and this is what I'm most comfortable with. That one did stress me out just a little bit, if I'm being completely honest. And it's just all about what you're used to, but I'm going to color this one and I'm going to speed it up, and then we're going to look at the two and compare them. And then I'm going to come back and do the same thing with the Polychromos and show you why I choose to go darkest to lightest with my Polychromos. This is how I would normally do this. I would just add my lightest color and preserve all of those spaces there. And then I would come back with my next lightest color and I would just blend some of this color right into it. And this allows me to decide right away where I want my highlights, because the highlights to me are the absolute most important. That is what's going to make your leaf or whatever object on your coloring page really, really pop. So now I'm going to come back with my next color, and in some places I'm laying it right over, but in other places I'm just going to lay a little bit of this color down. I think maybe I should come up here and see, I said I was going to speed this up to music, but I think honestly it's really helpful to watch this and see the difference in how I would lay the colors down. And now I'm going to use my darkest color and start adding in some of this. This is the marine green, and I'm actually just ignoring those lines and pulling this down into here just a little bit. Now I'm going to come back with my lightest color and I'm going to add some more of this. And I think over here on this side I want to leave a pop of white. And see, that's the other thing. Doing it this way allows me to leave a little bit of the white of the paper without instantly taking my darker colors and blending them into areas that I don't want them. Now I have my spring green, so I'm going to start adding this color into some of the areas where I want it. And I think I want just a pop of color here on the outside. I want a lot more of this color than I was able to do in the other one because I just instantly laid those colors in places where I really didn't want them, just because I was so off track at laying the colors down because I'm just not used to doing it that way. Now I have the Kelly green and I'm going to start to add some of this color here. And again, right there, I want to leave a little bit of the white of the paper as well. And I'm pulling this down just a little bit further. I feel like by doing it this way, I can be just a bit more artistic and it gives me more time to decide where I want to lay my colors. Now I have my marine green and I'm just going to use this to add a little bit more of those shadows, or a little bit more shading where I want them. Y'all know I like to go over the veins of the leaves just like this because I think it adds quite a bit more depth. Okay, so now I'm coming back with my lightest color and I'm going to blend some of these colors out. And it's just very important to use your lightest color to blend some of your other colors out. And you could see that now I'm not pulling it all the way into this area, just because I want to use some of that white of the paper. And so now I'm coming to my next lightest color, which is my spring green, and I'm going to add a little bit more of a pop with this. And I'm just blending all of the colors on the outside here. And now I have my Kelly green, and I'm going to add a little bit of my, I guess this would be my second mid-tone, and then back to the darkest color. And now I'm just going to pull all the colors together with my lightest color and pull them into those areas where I want to keep the white as well, and just blend everything out. Okay, so both of those are done. This one was the one that I did from darkest to lightest and then lightest to darkest. And I feel like I really like this one much better. You can see that I was able to use a little bit of the white of the paper as well as the highlight color, and it looks like it's just got a few more highlights in it. And this is the look that I usually go for, where I've got quite a bit more highlights using a little bit of the white of the paper as well as my highlight color. And when I went darkest to lightest, it was just really much more difficult for me with such smaller spaces to be able to preserve that highlighted area. I still like how the colors lay down in this one, and I still think it came together really beautifully. It was just a different way of doing it, and it was a way that I'm not really used to. So it just goes to show that you really need to do what works best for you when it comes to whatever object that you're coloring on a coloring page. Now, if I had a whole lot more space to cover, this would have been a whole lot easier to go from darkest to lightest rather than lightest to darkest. But I just find it is best to go lightest to darkest and preserve that highlight area initially so that you don't come back into it when you have such small spaces with your midtones and your darkest colors. So now I have the Polychromos, and I just picked a couple colors or a few colors that I thought would be good for a pumpkin. I'm just going to color one of these pumpkins, and then I've got the separate sections here so that we can see how different they lay down if we apply them lightest to darkest as opposed to darkest to lightest. So I'm going to do lightest to darkest here first on this part of the pumpkin, and so I'm just going to lay my color down. And again, even with the Polychromos, this is much easier for me because it helps me to lay that color down. And these lay down in layers since they are an oil-based pencil. And so I like having that initial full layer there and then coming back and laying another color over it. But I'm going to show you the difference in what it looks like if you do lightest to darkest and then darkest to lightest right next to it. So now I'm going to come back with my next color, and you can do this either way. You can do this lightest to darkest or darkest to lightest, whichever one you feel works best for you. You could see that these are so amazing that the colors just blend right into one another. You could see this darker color blending right into that other color there. And now I'm going to come back with my last color, and we're gonna lay it right over those other colors. So I didn't mention what colors I was using, so let me go ahead and let you know that now. But I've got cadmium orange, light cadmium red, sanguine, and my last one is brown ochre. Okay, so now it's time to lay down the brown ochre, and you can see how beautifully these lay down right over the other colors. And I think the reason that I like to do darkest to lightest with these is because it helps to add a little bit more shading to the objects I'm coloring. So now I'm going back to my lightest color, and I'm going to go over all of that area that I had covered with the lightest color. And you can see how amazing these pencils are. Once you lay the color and you start laying the colors layer after layer after layer, the color just really starts to intensify. Now I have my light cadmium red again, and I'm just blending it right into that highlighted area. Now we're going to go to the next color, which is the sanguine, and we are going to apply that right on top. And now my darkest color, which is the brown ochre. Okay, so that is just one part of the pumpkin. I've got all my colors laid down. We went lightest to darkest. Now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go darkest to lightest. And so y'all be able to see the difference with these Polychromos. So I'm just going to line this part of the pumpkin here because I want a lot of extra color or extra shading right in here in this area, because that's what's going to create all that extra depth and dimension. And you're going to see why I like to lay these down this way rather than lightest to darkest. Now I have the sanguine, and I'm going to layer it right over that one and pull it out just a little bit more into the center, but it's just creating a blend of those two colors now. And I am leaving that space open. Now here on this space, it may make a difference because I do have a lot more space here, rather than those little tiny sections on the leaves that I was coloring with the Prismacolors. But you can already see the difference in the color from going darkest to lightest. rather than lightest to darkest. Now I have my next color, and I'm going to add this color as another layer right over the top. And that's why I like to do it this way with these pencils, because it allows me to create the blend of those colors, and it just layers the colors over one another so much easier for me. And you can see that the brightness of this color is still really shining through, but we still have that much deeper shadow there than we did over here. And this is just only the first layer. I've not even finished my first layer here. So now I'm coming back with my lightest color, and I am just adding that color in there and blending all of these colors together, and I'm going to lay it over those darkest colors too, and it's really just going to make it pop. And so now I'm going to start all over and come back with my darkest color. And I don't know if you can see that on camera, how this section does look a little bit different than this section. If you've tried darkest to lightest and lightest to darkest with your Polychromos, you'll have to let me know what worked best for you. Now I have the sanguine, and I'm going to add another layer of this color. And I just feel like they perform so much better like this. I don't know what it is, but maybe it's because they are an oil-based pencil and they are meant to layer one color over the other. Now I have the light cadmium red, and we are going to really try to brighten this up. But do you see how that color laid right over the top there and really brighten that up? I just feel like the lighter colors layer better over the darker colors with these. Now I have the color I was using for the highlighted areas, and that is the cadmium orange. And I'm just going to add this in here. And I feel like I was able to get more layers and just a much better blend by doing it this way. I felt like the other way I used more of the paper faster, and I felt like this way also the colors just laid over one another much easier. So looking at this section of the pumpkin, it looks much brighter and more vibrant. And looking at this section over here, it just doesn't to me. Now I'm going to come back on this section over here, and I'm going to continue to go lightest to darkest, and we're going to see what we can do. So I know I could definitely add quite a bit more of this color here. So let's see if we can make a bit of a difference and make it look more like the center. Now I have the light cadmium red, which is my next color. And see, the colors are still laying down, but I feel like I have a lot less of the paper left over here on the other side, and they just really look a little bit different. I see a lot more of the red on this side, but I see a lot more of the shading and shadows here in this section. I'm coming back to my next darkest color, and I'm just adding a little bit more of this. And now we're going to go to the darkest color. Try to add some more shading and shadows to give it just a little bit more depth. I don't know, I see a lot more red on this side than I do on this side. Let's see if I can come back in here and maybe add a little bit more of the red. And of course I can, because these pencils, they'll layer forever. They really will. But look how pretty that is. I just feel like I was able to add a lot more of the shadows to create a little bit more depth on this one, and the colors are still layering. I can still lay more color. Let me come back and add my lightest color and intensify that highlight just a little bit more. But they both look pretty much the same. I just feel like right here, because I laid the darkest color first, I was able to create much more depth here in this section than I was over here on this one where I went lightest to darkest. Since they are an oil-based pencil and they perform much better when you lay them down in layers, I laid a full layer of my lightest color, and then I just came back from lightest to darkest. But when it was time to come back and add my darkest color for the shading, I don't feel like it was dark enough or that it created enough of a really pretty blend. But over here I was still able to add a lot more depth and dimension and keeping the blend of the colors as I wanted them. So it just works much easier for me that way. And that's the way that I like to do it when I'm using the Polychromos. So just because I can't leave an unfinished pumpkin, I'm just going to come back over here, and again I'm going to do it the way that I like to do it with the Polychromos, and I'm going to go darkest to lightest and finish it off. So I've got my next color in my color combination, and I'm just creating a blend of those colors. And now I'm coming back with the orange and blending that color right into those, and then my lightest color and filling in the rest of that space. Now I'm going to go back again and do the same thing. So I hope y'all enjoyed enjoyed this video, and I hope it was a little bit helpful in helping you to decide whether or not you want to go from lightest to darkest or darkest to lightest. Of course, for me, I prefer going lightest to darkest when I'm using my Prismacolors, and then when I'm using my Polychromos, I prefer darkest to lightest. And it's generally just whatever way works best for you, whatever way you're more comfortable with. You saw when I went and tried to do darkest to lightest with my Prismacolors, I was just completely lost, honestly. Because I'm just so used to doing it the other way. And if I'm being at all honest, it added a little bit of stress to my coloring, and coloring should not be stressful. It is something we do to relax and just create beautiful art, lay our colors down, and just really enjoy watching the colors go down on the paper as everything comes together as a whole and we create a absolutely beautiful coloring page. So whatever way you decide to do it, or whatever way you're most comfortable with, I would love to know what that is if you could let me know in the comments below, because I think it's really interesting how some people do it different ways. Everything you've seen in this video I will have in the description box below. I hope y'all have a wonderful day. Happy coloring. Bye.